Win-loss is such a fun topic because every time you do one, you uncover new and actionable insights that you can use to really make a huge impact on your product. Once we worked with a team that was getting a ton of pressure from their VP of sales to discount on every single deal. I know that never happens at your company, but in this instance, that's what was going on. And the product team felt like maybe they were leaving money on the table. Maybe they shouldn't be discounting all the time. And so what we had them do was to go do 10 win analyses and find out, why are you actually winning? And what they found out when they did those 10 win analyses was that in 9 of the top 10 deals that they had recently won, the reason that they won wasn't price. They actually were winning for other reasons, namely their stellar reputation for having really good service and support. And so now they actually have some data to go back and inform a conversation with their VP of sales and with their entire business about why they're actually winning instead of anecdote. And that's what we want for you. My name is Paul Young. I'm an instructor with Pragmatic Institute. And prior to that, I was a product management and marketing executive. I worked at some really big companies like Cisco Systems and Dell, also a bunch of startups here in Austin, Texas, where I'm talking to you from today. I've been across hardware, software, and services and done win-loss in all of those different environments. And so today, we're excited to share with you 5 tips to really make your win-loss analysis sing as part of Win-Loss Week, hosted by Closed. And we're really honored to be a part of this, and we're excited to be your guide along this journey. So without further ado, let's get going. So tip number 1, when you're thinking about doing really good win-loss analysis, partner with sales. You don't want to make this an adversarial relationship. It doesn't have to be. It's important for sales to know that win-loss analysis is not a referendum on them. It's not a report card. It's not like we're going to go out and give them a grade. Sales, you got a C-, on this, because there's a lot of reasons why we might win or lose. And some of those reasons have nothing to do with sales. Like, for example, if we bought the wrong words as part of our search engine marketing, if we didn't have the right content presented to the buyer at the right point in time, then that buyer may have never even made it to a sales conversation. And that had nothing to do with the salesperson's individual performance, yet it was a big reason why that ended up as a loss. And so to really partner with sales, number 1, we want to make sure they understand why we're doing it. It's to inform an entire understanding of the buyer and how they make decisions. Number 2, sales can really help us by planting the seed, so to speak, of a good win-loss interview. Maybe early on in those sales interactions, the salesperson can go to the buyer and say, hey, you know what? At the end of this deal, whichever way it ends up, whether you end up going with us or whether you go with a competitor or make no decision, our product team is going to follow up with you to do a win-loss interview and really understand all the various factors that went into your decision. Just by saying that one sentence early in the process, sales has now planted the seed to make it easier for you to go back later, because now that seed will grow into a nice flower or a tree, and you'll be able to have that interview in a much better and more effective way. So it greatly increases your hit rate if sales does that. So we want to make them our partner, but it's also really important to recognize that sales should not be doing win-loss analysis alone. They shouldn't be doing it on their own. And there's a lot of reasons for this. So many organizations get this wrong. One of the primary reasons is that sales thinks that they're knowing why we're winning and losing, but they actually don't. I'm sure many of you in your Salesforce instance or wherever you do your CRM, after sales has to go and close a win, whether it's closed win or closed loss, they have to go tag it with a certain code as to why they're winning and losing. But here's the problem. Sales doesn't really know. And just to illustrate this, if you went to your sales team right now and said, hey, sales, we are super bummed out. We just lost this big deal. Why did we lose? In my experience, you're going to hear one of 2 answers from sales. Either they're going to come back and say we lost because of price. It was just way too expensive. Or they'll come back and say we lost because the features of the product were insufficient. All right, product sucks, price is too high. That's why we lost, almost always. On the other hand, if you go to sales and say, hey, sales, great job landing that big deal, what do you think we're going to hear now? Sales is going to come back and say, you know what? Because of my amazing ability to close, I was able to overcome your dog of a product. Right? They're not going to say it like that, but that's what they're thinking. And so what we need to recognize is that Sales thinks those are the reasons why we win and lose: price, feature, relationship. But there's a million reasons why we might win or lose that go far beyond those things. And so what we need is a neutral third party to go in, like you, to actually assess why we're winning and losing. That could be somebody from the product team, like the product marketing manager or the product manager, or maybe it's somebody that you outsource your win-loss analysis to actually have those conversations in a neutral way that sales can't. And that leads us to the last reason why sales shouldn't do your win-loss, and that's your buyer lies to your salesperson. Buyers lie to sales all day long. It's just natural. You put yourself in the shoes of a buyer for just a moment. If you're a buyer and you're working with a salesperson for a couple of months on a big B2B type sale, or even if it's something smaller than that, and then you ultimately decide to go with a competitor. Now the salesperson from the first company calls you up a few weeks later to say, hey, I understand you went with my competitor. I'm just trying to figure out why. As a buyer, what you're thinking right now is, oh no, this salesperson is trying to restart the deal. I don't want that. I don't want to waste my time with that. So what can I say to hang up the phone as fast as possible? And right about now is when your buyer says, oh, I'm so sorry, you were just a little too expensive. Click. Or, you know what? I'm so sorry, you were missing a key feature that was really important to us. Click. So it's never a surprise that your sales team thinks we're losing on price and feature, because that's what they're hearing. But guess what? That doesn't make it true. So that's why we need that neutral third party. So that's our first tip. Partner with sales. Don't let sales do your win-loss analysis. Number two, you want to do your win-loss analysis at the right point in time. Now, what do we mean by this? Surely any time is a good time to do win-loss. Yeah, maybe. Here's how we think about it. When someone is in the evaluation process, we call them an evaluator. In pragmatic language, we call that an evaluator. And when somebody is an evaluator, what that means is they've recognized they have a problem. They figured out they have a problem that they want to solve. Now they're searching for a solution to that problem. So think of that as they're in the shopping phase. Now, when you talk to somebody in a win-loss analysis, you don't want to talk to them at any point in that shopping phase, because if you catch them too early before they make a decision, the risk is that doing your win-loss analysis will actually mess up the results of the deal. And it's really easy to do that if you're not careful. For instance, I was working with a team out in San Francisco a couple of years ago, and I had a product manager who told me this story that I immediately empathized with. In her case, a salesperson approached her at the end of the quarter and said, hey, product manager, I've got this big deal. It's going to make our number for the quarter. All they want is to see the product manager show the roadmap before they sign the contract. So would you come with me to show the roadmap? And so now you have three people sitting down, because she went out with the salesperson. So you've got salesperson, product manager, and evaluator. And they're all sitting down at a table. And at some point in that conversation, the product manager looked over to the evaluator and said, so I'm just curious, have you thought about how you're going to deal with all those new government regulations that are going to pop up next year? And the evaluator said, well, no, what are you referring to? And the product manager said, oh yeah, I'm surprised you haven't heard of all this. It's going to change everything. It's going to change how you certify your products. It's going to change how you encrypt and store data. Changes everything. Now that's right about the point in time where the evaluator looked over to the salesperson to say, you know what, I'm not really up to speed on all those changes. I'm a little embarrassed to say, but I think I better put this deal on hold for a couple of quarters so I can do a little bit more research, find out what I need to think about. Now, how do you think that car ride back to the office went between product manager and salesperson? Not so good, not so good. So in order to avoid this problem of messing up deals by doing our win-loss research, there is a specific subset of those evaluators that we want to go after and talk to. And we call this subset recent evaluators. Here's the definition of a recent evaluator. You want to look for that group that was shopping, but they've made their decision. They've made their purchase decision to either go with you or with somebody else. However, they have not yet implemented or installed whatever they've chosen. This is the Goldilocks period in which you want to talk to them. Because once they make their purchase decision to either go with you or somebody else, the risk of messing up the deal goes down immensely. But you got to catch them before they start to implement, install, or use your product. Because once they start to use your product, they're no longer an evaluator. They're not shopping anymore. Right now, they turn into a user. And once you start to use the product, if you interview them at that point, You're going to get user style feedback about what they like or don't like about the product itself. What was the experience of using it or installing it? All that is wonderful research if you want user research. But right now we're trying to do win-loss and we're trying to get the question, why are we winning and why are we losing? And if you let them start to use the product, they're going to forget all that stuff. So catch them right here in that middle point. I call that the Goldilocks zone, after they make their decision, but before they implement. Anywhere outside of that zone, you're either risking the deal or you're catching them too late and they're going to forget all the answers to the questions that you're seeking in a good win-loss interview. Tip number 3, we want to start with wins. Sometimes win-loss analysis can be a little bit tricky to set up within an organization. Sometimes if the team doesn't have the right idea about what a good win-loss structure and program is going to be about, then you'll see people putting up barriers like, I don't want you talking to my customers, or you'll hear it's basically some variation of who moved my cheese. And so the easiest way to get around that is to start with wins. Do win analysis and win interviews, because guess what? No one is ever opposed to celebrating a win. Wins are happy. Why did we win? Let's replicate that. And so wins are easy to talk to as well. They're easy to get because they like you. They chose you for a reason. And so you're going to find your hit rate when you're talking to wins for those interviews is going to be a lot higher than losses. But also don't discount. A lot of people discount wins like, oh, I don't need to talk. Guess what? Wins are great. Why did you win? Wouldn't you want to replicate that? Remember, your win is your competitor's loss. I have a really good friend and consultant that I work with who lives here in Austin. His name is Will Scott, and he does some outsourced win-loss analysis, part of his business. And he always has this analogy. He's a big tennis player. He says, if I were to win a contest to go and hit balls back and forth with Roger Federer, who's one of the world's best tennis players, let's say I go and do that for 15 minutes and we hit balls back and forth. And by some miracle, I'm able to win a couple of points against Roger Federer. At the very end of my time with him, when I walk up to the net and shake hands before I walk off, what if I just shake hands, walk off and say, thank you very much? What a missed opportunity. Wouldn't it be a great opportunity at that point to say, hey, Roger, those couple of balls that I was able to get past you, how was I able to do that? What caused me to win those points? Remember, your win is their loss. So don't discount wins. You can get some really valuable information from wins and maybe replicate those to get even more success. Tip number 4, you want to ask the right questions to inform your understanding of the buyer's journey. Most organizations, when they think about the way that they sell, they think about their sales funnel and the various steps that go into their sales process. And it's a pretty common way of thinking. If I were to go to your Salesforce instance or your CRM, whatever you use, I'm sure that your sales team has to go through and code deals in various stages. Like in stage 1, they're a lead, then they get qualified, then they're an opportunity, then they get a demo, and eventually they're closed and they get documents and so on. That's not how your buyer thinks. Like your buyer doesn't think, right now, I'm a lead. Now I'm qualified, right? They don't think that way. So what we have to recognize is that a good win-loss is not about us and our process. It's about them and how they think. And in parallel to your sales funnel or your sales process is the buyer's journey. At Pragmatic, we refer to this as the buyer's experience. And the basic idea is to think about what does their journey look like and mapping that out. I want you to think about for just a moment, if you were to make a major purchase, like let's say you were thinking about buying a new car. I just bought a new truck, and so I went through this myself recently. The very first step you take when you go to buy a new car is probably not to drive to the dealer lot and randomly pick out a car and ask the salesperson, can I go on a test drive? There's no way that's the first step you take. That's the 17th step you take. The first thing you do is you probably go on Google and you start doing some research. You're probably not locked into one model at that point. You're probably looking at several different brands and experiences and models and thinking about the trade-offs and so on. Then maybe next you go to a site like Consumer Reports and you look at reviews. And then maybe you look at your social media and see what your friends use. Then maybe you call up one of your friends and say, hey, I notice you have whatever. Are you happy with that? And then finally, after going through all this research, you might call up the dealer and say, I want to take a test drive. And so it's important to recognize that if you're losing business in the upper half of that buyer's journey, the interaction that needs to be corrected there is not one that is driven by sales, but rather one that's driven by marketing. So through the keywords that we buy, through the content and digital marketing that we do, we have to make sure that we're giving the buyer the right information at the right point in time to move them through their journey and ultimately get them to a conversation with sales. And so good win-loss interviews and win-loss analysis are really about informing a complete understanding of the buyer's journey so we can map it out and give them the right information to drive them ultimately towards a successful decision in our favor. Last tip, tip number 5. We want to think about separating the interview portion of our win-loss from the analysis. A lot of people think of win-loss analysis as one big thing, but it's actually at least 2 things. There's the interview, there's the analysis. And the interview always precedes the analysis. You can't do an analysis unless you have a bunch of interviews that go into it and feed your analysis. They're actually very different. And guess what? It doesn't have to be the same person who does both of these. Maybe you have somebody different who's going out and doing the interviews than somebody who is processing all that information and doing the analysis internally. Some organizations also choose to outsource one or the other. So maybe you choose to outsource all of your interviews. So you maybe hire a consultant or a company to go out there and do a bunch of interviews for you so that you can take that on and read the interviews and do the analysis yourself, or vice versa. We want to focus you in on the most high value work, whether that's asking the right questions of your buyer or whether that's doing the meta-analysis, but they don't have to be the same person. They don't even have to be done by the same organization. So one tip for making your win-loss analysis great is to focus you in on those things that you do best by making sure that your win and loss analysis are done separate interview and analysis. All right, so think about that as you go through this. All right, so our 5 tips for today: partner with sales to make sure they know this is not a referendum on them and they plant the seed. Get them at the right point in time. Remember, we're looking for recent evaluators. They made their purchase decision, but they haven't yet implemented whatever they've chosen. Third, start with wins. Wins are happy. Everybody likes wins, and it's an easy way to get started. Fourth, map out your buyer's journey. Remember, wins and losses could happen far before the interaction with sales. By the time they get to the sales conversation, for most B2B, they're at least 70% towards their way in terms of making an overall decision. And then finally, think about separating the interview portion of win-loss from the analysis. They don't have to be the same. Maybe you want to outsource one or the other so you can focus in on your most high value work. If you're interested in these topics and topics like them, I would encourage you to check out our foundations class and focus class here at Pragmatic Institute, where we dive into these topics in even more depth than we were able to do today. You can go to one of those classes online with myself or one of my peers. Pretty soon, we're going to be doing these in person again, too. And you can also take them on demand. Just go to pragmaticinstitute.com and you can learn a lot more. If you want to reach me, you'll see my email address here on the screen, pyoung@pragmaticinstitute.com. So have a great day. We'd love to thank our friends at Closed for hosting Win-Loss Week, and we'll see you soon.